of a police officer fatally shooting a black man in the back of the head as he lay face down on the ground.
On the quiet early morning of February 9th, 1968, a life was lost in Los Angeles under circumstances that remain covered in mystery and controversy. The events of that day took place near a cleaning business at 3870 South Normandy Avenue, where a young man, now known only as John Doe, was discovered attempting a break-in. The actions that followed not only led to his death, but have left questions that linger over 5 decades later. What was this incident? Do you have any clues? It was 5:13 a.m. when 2 Los Angeles police officers, Charles Livingston and Robert Hutton, stumbled upon what seemed like an ordinary crime in progress. The suspect, a young black male believed to be between 15 and 20 years old, was startled as the officers caught him in the act. In a split-second decision driven by fear or desperation, he sought refuge by hiding in a trash barrel near the scene. When ordered to come out, the young man panicked. Instead of surrendering, he attempted to flee, scaling a nearby fence. Officer Livingston fired a shot as the youth climbed. Hearing the gunfire and assuming they were under attack, Officer Hutton fired as well. The young man fell, fatally struck. Tragically, it remains unclear which bullet ended his life. Was it an unclear justification? In the aftermath of the shooting, no official determination was made regarding whether the young man's death was a homicide or a justified act of law enforcement. Reports from the scene suggested no indication that the youth posed a direct threat to the officers. The tragic end seemed to result from a chaotic moment of fear and miscommunication. Had this incident occurred today, it would undoubtedly have gone viral and demanded accountability. Public scrutiny, driven by the advent of body cameras and instant access to social media, would have brought this case into the national spotlight. Did you know his identity was a mystery? One of the most haunting aspects of this case is that the young man has never been identified. Descriptions at the time depicted him as tall, standing at 6 feet 3 inches and weighing 156 pounds. He was dressed in a distinct outfit, an avocado green sweater layered over a 2-tone green turtleneck, navy blue pants, and high-top gray shoes. Despite these details, no one came forward to claim him. There is evidence suggesting he may have used the name Randolph Houser during his life. However, a thorough search of records from the era turned up no definitive matches. Multiple individuals in Los Angeles bore that name, but none aligned with the victim's description or circumstances. This lack of identification adds a layer of tragedy to an already heartbreaking story. Who was this young man? Did he have a family? Friends? Dreams? His anonymity erases the possibility of closure for those who may have cared about him. His life was lost in seconds. The young man's actions that morning suggest desperation, though his motivations remain speculative. Was he a troubled youth trying to survive? A runaway seeking shelter? His age and lack of criminal sophistication indicate he may have been a minor thrust into a situation beyond his control. The decision to flee and the subsequent shots fired are at the core of this case's unresolved nature. Fleeing from police, though unlawful, does not inherently justify a fatal response unless a threat is evident. The absence of evidence that the young man posed harm to the officers underscores the tragedy. What's the message that this story gives to today's society? In 1968, the social and political climate of Los Angeles was charged. The city was struggling with civil rights tensions, economic disparities, and strained relationships between law enforcement and communities of color. These dynamics likely influenced how this case was handled or overlooked. Today, the incident would have been subjected to significant public examination. Discussions surrounding police reform, racial bias, and the disproportionate use of force would dominate the narrative. Community advocates and national media would demand transparency, accountability, and justice for the young man who died unnamed and unclaimed. What does the evidence reveal? The physical evidence provides some clues about the young man's life. His clothing, a green turtleneck, sweater, and well-kept pants, indicates he was not entirely destitute. He was tall and lean, suggesting a youth still growing into adulthood. These details humanize him, reminding us that he is more than a statistic. He is someone's child. Yet the most critical piece of evidence remains his name or lack thereof. The name Randolph Houser may have been an alias, a borrowed identity, or a fragment of truth. Whatever the case, it has not led to any meaningful answers. Why there was such silence surrounding this case? One of the most perplexing aspects of this tragedy is the lack of public or familial inquiry. In many cases, unidentified individuals, families, or acquaintances eventually come forward. Yet in this instance, the silence is deafening. Did his family know he was missing? Were they unable to search for him due to systemic barriers or fear of law enforcement? Or was he alone in the world, disconnected from a support system? The unanswered questions make the case all the more haunting. It's possible that societal attitudes in 1968 played a role in the lack of attention. Cases involving young black men were often dismissed or ignored, particularly if the circumstances suggested criminal behavior. Was it a ripple effect of a single moment? The events of February 9th, 1968, did not end with the young man's death. They left a legacy of questions, doubts, and what-ifs. The officers involved, Charles Livingston and Robert Hutton, likely carried the weight of that morning for the rest of their lives. The community, though silent at the time, may have had lots of tension and grief. For the young man, his death marked the abrupt end of a story that had barely begun. The dreams he might have pursued, the life he might have lived, all were extinguished in a moment of panic and miscommunication. In modern times, there has been a growing effort to identify and honor those who have died unnamed. Advances in forensic science, such as DNA testing and genealogical research, offer hope that cases like this one may one day be solved. If his remains are still preserved, it is possible that a modern investigation could finally attach a name to the young man who died that morning. Meanwhile, his story is a reminder of the need for justice, accountability, and humanity in our interactions with one another, especially in situations involving law enforcement. Who was Randolph Houser? The name Randolph Houser remains a tantalizing clue, though it may lead nowhere. It raises the possibility that the young man had connections or relationships that have yet to come to light. Perhaps he borrowed the name from someone he knew. Perhaps it was a pseudonym to protect his real identity. Whatever the truth, the name is a fragment of his story, a story that deserves to be told. The young man's death on February 9th, 1968, is a tragedy not only because of how it occurred, but because of how it has been forgotten. His anonymity denies him the dignity of recognition, and the lack of resolution leaves a void in the pursuit of justice. In a society increasingly committed to uncovering the truth and honoring the humanity of all individuals, this case stands as a challenge to remember, to question, and to seek answers for those who can no longer speak for themselves. As we reflect on the mystery of Randolph Houser, let us hope that one day, through the efforts of dedicated individuals and advances in technology, his identity will be restored, and his story will find its rightful place in history.